Hello there, everybody. Welcome along to EFL Debate. And I'm delighted to be joined on this championship podcast by my regular co-host, Oli Mann. How are you, Oli?
Yes, I'm not bad, thank you. Gab I've had the start of the week off work, so it's my first day back today, so I'm a little bit more tired than normal, but I shouldn't complain. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we can liven you straight up. And what'll help with that is we're joined by Danny Glaves, who's a Rotherham United supporter from the New York Talk podcast. Danny, great to have you on the show. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the best of starts for the Millers, so just talk us through the tricky opening 4 games.
Yeah, not been the best, shall we say? Like, still winless. I mean, for me, well, I've only made it to the Morecambe game in the cup so far, just because of work. But we get a lot of Rotherham fans in the pub, and especially after the Stoke game, they all came in and said it was an absolute disaster. So that's fun. The Blackburn game. I mean, we've all seen the uproar that happened with Bobby Madley and some of the decisions that went against us, and then subsequently the draw. But I think Blackburn has been the better showing so far of the season.
Yeah.
What are the other ones?
Sunderland on Saturday.
Yeah, Sunderland. Yeah, Sunderland was a bit of a sounded like we played well, to get the goal early. I've seen the goal that the club put out, like that's completely against this Rotherham stereotype of hoofball. We actually played it on the ground. But then second half just undid us, really. And we just seemed to switch off for it.
I think the thing that would worry me, Danny, and I watched the highlights back of the Sunderland game, was that you did seem to be very passive in terms of the defending at certain moments. And there are points where you had lots of players around the ball and the player with the ball, but you didn't necessarily put a challenge in or make it difficult for them. And I think that's the worrying thing for me, because I can accept, I'm sure Rotherham fans can accept not necessarily having the quality to be up to the level, but I feel like a little bit easier to create a chance against Sunderland.
Yeah, like I say, it's just felt a bit, standoffish, at times. Like I say, quite passive as well. I'm not entirely sure with where the direction's going with that. Like, is it a case of standing off and letting the other team have the ball, and then we try and get them on the counter and try and do it that way? But at the same time, we've almost got used to Rotherham being the high press team. Like normally,
certainly don't look like a high pressing team to me at the moment.
Yeah, like last season, we sort of got the vibe of the high press team. I mean, take the 4-0 win over Blackburn last season. A lot of that came from us just high pressing and unsettling the team. And like you say, if we were very standoffish and passive against Sunderland, and they look there for effectively the taking with some of it, maybe that's the game where the high press should be utilised, the case of upsetting the opposition, and getting in the faces and not really standing off. So, I don't know, maybe it's some things that are trying to be implemented. Maybe it's some things that are just not quite completely there through training at the moment. Or maybe it's just a lack of bodies to execute the plan effectively, because they seem to be dropping like flies at the minute, don't they?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I had a look at the squad that went to Sunderland, and I look at the bench that you've got. You've got a series of players who you've got Jamie McCarthy, who struggled in League Two with Leyton Orient last season. You've got Tom Eaves, who the best season of his career was 4 years ago, and he with Gillingham in League One. He's not done an awful lot since. Talaji Bowler, I've got to be truthful, I don't think he's anything close to a championship player. Josh Coyote hasn't necessarily torn up trees in the lower leagues. You've got Sean Morrison on the bench, which is great as a centre-back, but he's not necessarily a game-changer type to have on the bench. And then when Hakeem Adofin had to be forced off in the first half at Sunderland, his replacement was Kieran McGuckin, who played 24 games at Scarborough last season. He's the one that you've got on the bench. So it does feel like first 11's okay, but there's a massive drop-off in quality from there, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I remember Matt Taylor saying in pre-season that Bowler was one of the players potentially going out on loan somewhere else, wasn't really in his plans. So I think he's there just because we don't really have the backup left-sided player. We've got Cohen Bramall and Shane Ferguson's still out recovering from a hernia operation. So it's like, you're just going to have to be there, son. I mean, for him to have that responsibility and that step up, to be fair, because I think he was at Bradford last season on loan. I think it was.
I think so, yeah.
Which again, he didn't, like I say, he didn't really tear up any trees, but it was steady at League Two level, and to be put into the Championship suddenly as like your next man up sort of thing, he's sort of coped as well as he can do with it. But like you say, he's still not like that standard. I don't think. Like no against the guy. Like it's just development that he needs, but he's sort of like just been thrust into it. And then like with Kieran McGuckin, I mean, I think Matt Taylor sees something in McGuckin, because I've spoke to a guy who has done a fair bit of reporting at Scarborough, and he said, "How have we got McGuckin off you lot? Like, he's unreal."
Yeah.
But again, that is a huge jump for a lad who, he's still effectively just in and about academy level. Like, he's just about at the breakthrough stage.
You would think League Two or National League loan would be
exactly like. I mean, look at Curtis DeRose. He's gone out on loan to National League level, and Jake Hull has as well. Two players who are a little bit up, still in the development stage themselves, and at that academy level. But McGuckin, because he's the forward, and we are lacking forwards according to Matt Taylor, he's like, right, you're going to have to go in, son. And if I'm being honest, I think he has done very well to be put in that situation to make his first league debuts for the club. He has done very well, and I mean, if this carries on being the case, and for one way or another we don't bring a forward in, I think that will carry on being the case, and at some point he will get his first goal for the club. But I don't want it to be this season. As much as I want him to do well and everything, I think his development needs to be centred at a bit more of a physical league, like League Two, National League level, where you sort of learn to be the stronger footballers. But yeah, it's a little bit patchwork quilt at the minute. Like, that's how it feels.
Yeah, absolutely. Oli, let's come to you on this from an outside perspective, because what saved Rotherham last season was they went on quite a big spending spree in January, and that was where they were able to get experienced Championship players, and that ultimately kept them up. But if I'm not mistaken, I think there were very sort of specialist circumstances which meant the money was available on that occasion, and it's not necessarily going to be the case in every window. Is that a little bit of a worry from you from the outside looking in, whether Rotherham are going to get the investment that they need to strengthen this squad, which is clearly short at the moment?
Yeah, it is. It's really concerning because obviously it feels like a familiar story a little bit for Rotherham in the Championship. When they've come up, they've had a fantastic season last year, really done well to stay in the division. But it does feel as though the division's got better this year. I think the three coming up are better than the three that went down. And so staying still in this league right now means that you are dropping down and down towards that relegation zone. Been looking at some of the stats for Rotherham, and I know so far it's only sort of 3 games in the league, but bottom of the XG conceded, I think 22nd for XG created, they're bottom for possession. It's just really not looking like what's in the squad right now is capable of keeping them in the division. And I think for me, there was a lot of optimism that I heard from my friends who are Rotherham fans through the summer. I think pre-season had gone really well, and it felt as though with some of the incomings, particularly Cafu, they were really expected to kick on, make a difference, and be that difference to keep them away from the relegation zone again. But with a couple of injuries, it's just really exposed how threadbare the squad is. And I think without investment and without more players in the squad, I just don't think they've got a team that can last 46 games, and that's the difficulty. And effectively, that brings you to, if everybody's fit and the first 11 can play 20 games, can you get enough points in 20 games to keep you up? And that's an unbelievably big ask. And so for me, it's all about building squad depth now, because they need a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, coming to you, I mean, Oli did mention there the signing of Cafu in midfield. He played a nice little role in the build-up to Hakeem Adofin's goal on Saturday. Is he the one positive that you've got to say far?
I think. I mean, we've not seen enough of TE so far to really have an accurate
Good
statement.
signing as well, I think that, yeah.
Yeah, I think he'll I hope he's a good signing. He's our club record signing. I hope he turns good. But yeah, like, just to echo what you've said, Ollie, a lot of Rotherham fans are quite optimistic with the signings we've made, but not to sound like Oliver Twist, but please, sir, can we have some more? It's just more bodies. Like, Rotherham fans I speak to in the pub that I work out at games as well, they've all said, like, we just need, like, bulking up a little bit, like another 3 or 4 just to bulk up certain positions. But yeah, Cafu will be quite pivotal. I mean, the free kick he scored against Lincoln in pre-season, and how he very nearly scored against Sheffield, I think it was Sheffield United, with the same routine. Like, obviously that will get us goals, but that's one thing we can't rely on. I think Cafu is quite a physical presence in midfield. Him alongside Ollie Rathbone is quite a good pairing, if I'm being honest. And it's also pushed Akima Doffin like a bit further up the pitch, which is something that I've not seen him play before. Normally, it was more of the holding midfielder role, but now he's almost the attacking midfielder role, and maybe that's because Taylor's seen how powerful his right boot is, and it's like, right, you can go there and hit it on the edge of the box. But
like
I do
a
think
Kevin Nolan type, just arrive, penalty box and get on the end of things.
I mean, we all remember the famous commentary, Basham arriving. Well, now we've got a Doffin arriving all the time.
I really like that reference.
Yeah, I did. I enjoyed that one. Thank you. Yeah, Rotherham to stay up, Gab. Get it on your notes.
I've put a good account for myself. Lovely stuff. But yeah, Doffin almost seems like revitalised under Matt Taylor. He seems to be the player that's really peaked under Taylor's stewardship. And I think, again with some signings like Lemmy Keeser, I don't think we've seen enough of him. He's still quite a raw talent as well.
It's his first loan as well, I think, isn't he? He's not played much senior football before now.
Yeah,
so.
and then Onyedinma, he's been suspended for the Sunderland game as well. So we've not seen enough of him, and the one game he's played really well in, he's scored. So it's a bit, weigh it up. Yeah. But yeah, like I say, it's just need to fill out the signings a little bit more,
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple of questions just coming out the back of that. So I think first one for me, Doffin, is he fit? What was he forced off with at the weekend? Do we know if he's back? Is he going to be out?
I'm not entirely sure, if I'm being honest. It's just sod's law that a player scores and the team's actually doing well, and then they'll either get suspended or injured. Because it happened with Peltier against Stoke, it happened with Onyedinma against Blackburn. Now it's happened to a Doffin against Sunderland. So I'm surprised.
And the one team that doesn't need that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm quite surprised that Coyote didn't go off against Morecambe after he scored. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure with a Doffin. I mean, I hope it's nothing serious. It sounds quite serious what's happened with Georgie Kelly, though. Yeah. Which again has made the attacker jigsaw even harder to solve. But yeah, I think it's just wait and see what happens with the Doffin.
Yeah, fingers crossed it's nothing too bad. And then the other side of it was just going to be, obviously, you referenced it a little bit there, and I noticed this, to say it was only the second game of the season, I think, Blackburn, the level of response, obviously not just from Rotherham fans, but from obviously the media around that as well. How much do you think that kind of thing has a ripple effect on the club? Do you think it galvanizes you normally? Do you get together and think there's a conspiracy? Or is it something that you constantly think you're fighting against someone and therefore it just grinds you down after a while? Because the response I saw from some of my friends who are Rotherham fans was intense, shall I say.
Yeah. I mean, Bobby Madley doesn't have the best rep as a referee. Like, don't get me wrong, he's a solid referee and it's a very hard job to do. And I sound like Mick from the podcast with saying this, but it's one of them where, like, I don't know. Like, there's one conspiracy that says, we always get the refs that are completely by the book because Howard Webb's the head of the PGMOL and he's a Rotherham fan. So it's like, we have to be by the book with the Gaffer's team sort of thing. But at the same time, we've had Howard Webb come out and apologise via the PGMOL for how Rotherham's been with officials. Rotherham fans like to have the tinfoil hats, I will admit. They think the EFL are completely against us all the time when it comes to referees. But one thing I will say is that the refereeing performance of Gavin Ward who has his own affiliation with Rotherham fans after that Barnsley game. I think he actually had a very solid refereeing performance against Sunderland. And you don't hear that very often from the Rotherham
Not from a
United
Rotherham
podcast.
fan.
No, but I think he had a good game with that one. It's just a shame that the previous week, Oli Mann had an absolutely shocking 15 minutes where effectively all the hell broke loose. So I was listening to it on my phone, and I had FootMob up with all the pings and everything. It's like, is he just booked the entire team just for laugh? It's like, what's happened here? So 15 minutes of madness there. No idea.
Danny, I just want to come back to Hakeem Badofin, who we mentioned earlier, has started the season well, and hopefully he can get back fit quickly. And also Tyler Blackett as well has apparently started the season better than maybe some people expected. And I guess that's the kind of thing Rotherham are going to need, one or two players that are just shooting out of the pack where you're not necessarily expecting huge things from them, but they end up surprising you. That's what Rotherham have got to have this season, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think, obviously, before going off injured, Adofin was one of the standout ones, like you say, and Blackett as well. I've heard he's been very solid in defence, to the point where it's almost like made Cameron Humphreys seem quiet. But sometimes, if you have a very quiet centre-back, they're doing the job right.
Yeah.
Same in midfield, to be fair. Like, if the midfielder's not doing anything completely hazardous in midfield, we're losing the ball, they're doing the job right. I think the thing is with Rotherham, we've got the two players, well, maybe three, including Victor, because he's kept us in games so far as well, but that goes without saying, really. I think we've got those three that are really standing out so far, but for a team of Rotherham's calibre, shall we say, you need more than three players having standout things. Like, you need your consistent performers in, say, Victor, Rathbone, and Humphreys, but you need a couple players still really doing well and really in form
to make it up.
You need your Tyler Blackett, your Onyie Dimmers, Jordan Hugel as well, who I think's been quite quiet this season as well. They're the players that you really need to be on song, and that's when Rotherham do well. So far this season, there's been flashes of what Rotherham can do, but there's been no fire. There was a bit of a fire at Blackburn until it all just crumbled in front of us. But every game there's a flash of something that Rotherham do well. Like against Sunderland, the goal, that was the flash of how Rotherham can be. The team spirit, that flash was at Stoke, coming straight out in second half and going, right, we can get a goal, we can go back and we can crack on. So there's been the little flashes, but we've just not got the fire going yet. Maybe that comes from more signings. Maybe that comes from more training. Maybe it just comes from just team cohesion, and the well-oiled machine. But 4 games in, I'm not sure what the answer is so far to making the fire.
Well, let's hope that fire comes. Danny, thanks so much. Huge fan of the New York Talk podcast. So thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Danny.
Cheers, Danny. Really appreciate it.
Delighted
to welcome in my next guest, which is Danny, I said Danny, getting mixed up. It's Ben Green. I'm terribly sorry, Ben. How are you, mate?
I'm all good, Gabe. Thank you very much. How are you guys doing?
Up there. Great to have you on the show from That Millwall Podcast. Just talk to us about Millwall season so far, because a lot of fans are a little bit disgruntled at the moment, I think is the word.
I know you've invited me on to discuss that, but do I have to go into it? Do you know what, Gabe? It's been an interesting one, to say the least. I think the typical highs and lows of being a football fan, I'd say. Obviously started excellently at Middlesbrough, first game of the season, fantastic win, really good performance, I think, by all accounts as well. And Romain Esse to get his first senior goal, huge highlight. And I jokingly started and put loads of messages in our group saying back us to win the league, the FA Cup, the League Cup, Champions League next year. And I was very excited. Quickly got brought back down to earth with a hammering by Reading. And I think it's been the manner of the defeat since, Gabe, that's been really the most worrying for us. As I say, the Reading game, it wasn't like we made huge amounts of changes. It was near enough a full strength side with a couple of people in or players in that were now probably more squad players, that were first team players last year, given the signings that we've made. And again, from what I understand, it was pretty much a Reading under-21 side, and we obviously got beat 4-0. Move on to Bristol City, John Belson, Memorial Day. You'd think normally sell out of the Den, hugely emotional occasion. We'd have been right up for it. But again, quite a lacklustre defeat. And then obviously move on to Sunday. Yeah, it wasn't great again. So we've very quickly gone through the huge emotions and the fickle football fans that have come out. But yeah, things need to improve pretty quickly, I think.
Where are you, Ben, on Gary Rowett? Because I think I've probably been quite surprised from an outside perspective that fans have been so quick to turn on him. When I think, again, from an outside perspective, it's very easy to say this. You know, when you don't go to the Den every other week, I'm fully aware of that. But I do feel like with Gary Rowett, he's a solid 7 out of 10 championship manager who, you know, he's got top half finishes in each of his 4 seasons in charge. You've never been too far off the playoff places on a bottom 6 budget. So there's part of me that's thinking, you know, is it a little bit harsh, some of the criticism of Rowett?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think if you look at not necessarily this year, but certainly even seasons gone by, the criticism that I think Rowett's not only had with Millwall, but Stoke fans, Birmingham fans.
He's not had much criticism among our fans. We love him.
He just gets criticised for his style of play, right? And I think that's been the biggest thing. I think for me that it's unjust. He's done a fantastic job. All the points you just mentioned. We're not a team that's blessed with a huge budget. We do very well with the limited resources that we've done. I think victim of his own success last year, but I think now probably looking back on the league, it's certainly not as strong as it is this year. You look at the likes of Norwich that obviously struggled for large parts but came on strong towards the end of last year. I think the 3 that have come up from League One, I watched Plymouth against Southampton, look really good. I know we haven't played any of these sides yet, but I think the 3 that have come up have improved the league, and I think the 3 that have come down have improved the league. Put into the mix the likes of Watford and the Norwich, who obviously didn't go up, but a yo-yo sorts of Premier League Championship clubs. I think it's just a really strong division. I don't think it was that strong last year. I think we overachieved. There is a long-winded answer to your question here, Gabe. But yeah, I do think it is unjust. As I said at the start, I think the most worrying thing has been the manner of our defeats rather than actually losing. Because I don't think as many Millwall fans, you go to Norwich away and expect to get a result. We've got a horrendous record against them anyway, but you just don't expect to get a result there. I think it's the way in which we've rolled over in a couple of, well, certainly that game didn't put in a good performance against Bristol City. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily right what's been said about Rowett. I'm a huge fan of his. And as you say, I think he's a pretty solid 7 out of 10 manager. If he doesn't do it with us, I could see him going to a slightly bigger club, bigger budget, and doing well. So yeah, maybe unjust slightly.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking of there, you talk about obviously victim of your own success and everything that he brought to Millwall. I think, how much do you think the end of last season plays into some of the fan sort of response? Because obviously in a fantastic position with 45 minutes of the season left to go, do you think there's an overhang there that's still in the back of fans' minds, and that actually that last 45 minutes has just sort of built a little bit of resentment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely, Oli. I think as a club, there's certainly a bit of a hangover to that. Look, to be in the position that we put ourselves in and not get it over the line was hugely disappointing and gutting. But I think looking at the bigger picture slightly, the last 10 games of the season, not only us, everyone in that sort of last playoff spot, no one really wanted to grab it. And there was other results in that sort of last 10, 12, 15 games that stick out where we struggled. But yeah, look, I think there is probably a little bit of a hangover. There's been a bit of a turnover in personnel, I guess. We had a few loan players that are no longer with us, the likes of Charlie Creswell, Shackleton, Ollie Burke. They've obviously gone back. Senior players that have moved on now, Scott Malone, Mason Bennett, that have been at the club for a couple of years. But again, Ollie, we've replaced those. So
stronger squad, I would think, on paper. That's the funny thing.
Do you know what, Gabe? You go through the people that we've signed, and you got Kevin Nisbet from Hibs. We targeted him in January. I think I don't know huge amounts about the Scottish League, I'd say, but he seemed to have done well. Hibs were pretty gutted that he'd left, and I think, bar an injury, he probably would have been in the Scotland squad for quite a long time. I think at one time Celtic were looking at him. So, yeah, you'd say good signing. Joe Bryan, we signed for Fulham, who was obviously on loan in France last year, but Premier League sort of experience, got obviously the two goals in the playoff final for Fulham to get them promoted. Casper de Noor that we've signed from Belgium, he's had Champions League experience. So, yeah, you go through it. Sarkic, who was on loan, obviously our new keeper, was on loan at Stoke and Birmingham. Again, from what I've heard, positive reviews from both their fan bases. And then we got Wes Harding from Rotherham, who I'd say, again, just solid championship standards. So, yeah, absolutely go. I think people that we've got in, and I think that's where it's kind of played in with the fan base. I would say it's probably been our strongest squad for a long time. And that's one thing I'd hugely credit Garrett for. I think when we had Neil Harris in the Championship, we were just punching above our weight. And Rowett has really built a Championship squad now, a proven Championship squad. And we've got the likes of Fleming and De Noor that have come in, Joe Bryan that I've mentioned. So we're starting to get that sort of higher caliber players. And going back to my earlier point, it probably is a little bit of a victim of success. And the fans are now looking at it and saying, look, we have got a stronger squad now. We should be doing a bit better.
Well, let's talk about Ian Fleming, Ben, because he started, last season he was absolutely outstanding and was one of the real signings of the season. This season he started a little bit quietly. There was sort of this feeling, I think, for Millwall that you've got Billy Mitchell on the ball, and last season he was so positive with his passing, and this season maybe he doesn't have the same options. And do you think that sort of reflects quite badly on the likes of Watmore and Fleming, that they've maybe been a little bit off colour?
Yeah, it's a difficult one with me. I look at Fleming, and he had a fantastic start to the season last year. And I just go back again to the last 10, 15 games where you want your marquee signing, your best player on the pitch is what he's been obviously hailed as from many Millwall fans, to really grab games by the scruff of the neck. And when you're not playing well as a team, get your team through it. And we didn't really see that from him. There was a lot of games last year that it just went missing. He wasn't involved. He just didn't do what we needed at the time. And I think that it's carried on how it finished last year. I don't think the style of play necessarily suits him, certainly away from home, the way we set up. But if I had my say, I would have driven him to Burnley and taken the money, because it was a lot of money for what we paid for him. And just going on to Billy Mitchell, I think, yeah, again, look, he's a Millwall boy, come through the youth academy. I think, again, I think he's possibly, for me, one of the first names on our team sheet. I think he's brilliant. Again, I think he's the sort of player that he could go on to better things, in a better side, in a better footballing side. You'd see a real top player. He's a very neat and tidy player, gets around the pitch, got good energy. Again, gets a bit of criticism from some of the fan base about it's a bit sideways. But again, if you're passing it to the likes of Fleming, who's on the ball, then it doesn't really matter, right? But yeah, going back to Fleming, I would have driven him to Burnley and taken the money personally.
Yeah, because what was it, 13 million that you were offered or something like that?
Yeah, it was various figures that were bandied about. I think it was incremental. It went up from 8 to 10 to 12. I think we wanted near 15, but just as a business point of view, and I think if you look at it from a just a transfer perspective, I think when you have such a small outlay for a player who's been so successful, I think, one, it gives off a good impression to other young players that you're trying to sign, that you can progress them, move them on to the Premier League. So ultimately, that's where every young player's goal, certainly from Europe, is going to be, that you can move them on and sell them, and they get their dream move if you want. But just, again, from a financial perspective, surely the club would have been better taking the money, reinvesting it. We could have got another one or two Zian Flemings, right? I know that's easier said than done. Like, I do get that, but I think we would have been a far better and more rounded squad had we invested it, got the money and invested it in 2 or 3 players rather than having one Zian Fleming. But that's just my opinion.
What's your take on that, Ollie, when it comes to, the benefits of cashing in on your best player after they've had one amazing first season? Because 12 million would have been loads for Millwall if they'd been offered that.
Okay, so let's jump in. My question, just going back to that, would be, with him having a slow start now, have we missed out on that opportunity to get that money or near close to 10,
I don't think you're getting
million?
12 million now.
Exactly. If he carries on the form that he's on, so if he wants to go in January, the Burnley are going to be going, well, he hasn't done what he did last year. So was it a flash in the pan? So, yeah, sorry to jump in there, but that's how I view it.
That's really important.
No, I think that's a really important reflection. And for me, it's a really difficult one, particularly in the Championship, because you've got very clearly two distinct camps here, haven't you? You've got for Millwall, this is loads of money, and the rebuild they can do to the squad will improve them going forwards and will make them, generally speaking, a better squad, more rounded, easier to take forward. That's the sort of business sensible approach. But then there is this football fan approach, isn't there? Let's be honest. If you're thinking last season we just missed out on the playoffs, let's get better this season and then let's get into the playoffs this time, and then you sell your best player. The fans, if you don't start well after that, are then looking at it saying, come on, we've got to be better than this. Why have we let him go? Why have we done that? And in the Championship, that risk against reward is massive. And we see it a lot across the division. You know, I use Bristol City as a really key example of that first stability business approach, where every year they're happy if they've got a star man, they'll move him on like they did Alex Scott. They're not going to splurge and go mad. They're going to build a rounded squad. And then over time, they're going to just get better and better. But it's a long time in the Championship and a long time in mid-table in the Championship. And not all fan bases are going to be patient for that. So I completely understand why you would reject the money. You would say, we want our star man. We're going to build around him. But after one season, it's such a huge risk that I do think long-term, the rewards of selling high when you get the opportunity is something that really shouldn't be passed up by teams in the Championship, because the money's not there for everybody.
Yeah, Ben, I do want to bring in Liam Russell from Wednesday Till I Die in a moment, but just one final question from me. What have Millwall got to do to change the mood around South Bermondsey and get themselves going back at the table?
Yeah, do you know what? I fear for Gary Rowett. Obviously, he was quite vocal after the game Sunday and just in his press conference about obviously some of the fan reaction against his old club Saturday against Stoke. I fear that in the next, and then obviously Birmingham, so he's got two very important games coming up. I think, yeah, as I say, I do fear just for what the mood's going to be like. It could turn toxic pretty quick. It doesn't get any easier after that. Just a small matter of Leeds at home as well. So, yeah, look, I think
Leeds at home, you always seem to lift yourselves for.
Do you know what, Gabriel? Again, that's kind of the mood that we're probably all in now. I just can't see us getting a result. I think in years gone past against Leeds, it's been obviously a very, very hostile atmosphere and a great game, one that we all look forward to. Probably both sets of fans, probably less so them, but it's always a great day. And we've always had a Neil Harris type manager that's front foot, get in their face, and I think that's been one of the key things with the criticism of Rowett recently has been that when we're not like that, and he doesn't take advantage of that home crowd. We play the same way away as we do at home, and as I getting that crowd involved, you want to be on the front foot and in teams' faces. So yes, we've had a great record against them, but maybe I'm just being hugely pessimistic here, but I'm not overly confident. But yeah, look, it's got to change. I think the result Saturday certainly helps. I think that's again easier said than done. I think Stoke have improved this year, obviously spent some money like they always do. A few people have been tipping them for a promotion. Birmingham again seem like they're in a great place. Brady effect, and seem like they're on the way up again. So yeah, it's a tough question, that game, but I don't know. A result sooner rather than later, I think, would be a good way to start.
Yeah, I think it's the most obvious answer, but it's probably the most accurate one. You need a result and a performance to give everyone a lift.
Absolutely.
Listen, yeah, Ben, thanks so much for joining us. All best with That Millwall Podcast and the Lions for the rest of the season, mate.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Ben. I'm delighted to bring in Liam Russell from Wednesday Till I Die. How are you, Liam?
Yeah, very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, great to have you on. Thanks for jumping on at short notice, mate. We really appreciate it. Obviously not a good start for the Wednesday. 3 straight defeats. A lot of the sort of feel-good factor from promotion has quite strongly gone out of gone out really. So just talk to me about how you're feeling as a Wednesday out right now.
Yeah, it's tricky, mate. To be honest with you, it was been a very, very strange summer. Let's say it's funny actually because literally I think I can't remember if more went on the Sunday or the Monday, But I was with one of my pals in the pub who was a big Ipswich fan, and he was, we're having a bit. We'd had a few, and we're going back and forth, and I ended up saying, 50 quid will stay above you. We'll finish above you this season. And then literally the next day or the day after, Moore's gone. So I was like, can I pay in installments, mate? When can I start? So, yeah, no, it's pretty deflating, to be honest, mate. I think every manager has the critics and, especially on social media, you see a bit more of that. So there are a few people that still weren't won over by Darren Moore, but I'd say the majority were shocked and surprised and, a bit upset, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I'm a massive Darren Moore cheerleader, but I do think there probably would have been a massive advantage for Sheffield Wednesday in terms of having the manager that took you up last season and won 96 points. What I'm kind of conscious about at the moment, Liam, is that a lot of the signings he brought in because of that disruption, and then for a couple of weeks or quite a while actually not having a manager in place or really a footballing mind of the club, the recruitment was basically put on hold. And then, so that's why you're seeing a lot of players coming in late in the window and probably, I imagine, sort of feeding into some disjointed performances.
Yeah, I think the issue was as well, our head of recruitment left and went to Blackpool. And then obviously Darren Moore went, and there's just, like you say, we obviously signed Reece James, who was at Blackpool. We had him on loan last season. Marvin Johnson signed an extension, but then seems to have been kind of frozen out. I don't know if it's at the point of saying frozen out yet, but it's not looking too good for him in terms of playing time. So yeah, it's strange, and I just think, like you say, you've got to be realistic, obviously, with how it has all unfolded, and it was going to all be late and what have you. But I think the way Sister's done about it so far hasn't impressed the majority of the fan base. Whether that's because he seems completely polar opposite to Darren Moore, and obviously this interview of Darren Moore's just come out about the situation there, and the sides of the story aren't marrying up, but Yeah,
I've not actually had a chance to watch that interview. Were there any major takeaways, Liam?
I mean, the video's about 5 minutes, and he essentially says that the visions between him and the chairman for the squad and going forward didn't align, and they agreed that it was time to part company. It was never about the money, which obviously our chairman's come out and said whatever he said about that, and I don't know. I think I know which side of the fence I sit on, and I'm not sure it's with our chairman, to be honest. But that's for everyone to make their own mind up on. We know the previous that's happened with him. So
yeah, Oli, how do you look at things at events? Obviously, being a blade yourself, I've outed you. What do you make of things across the city?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because, like you say, with Chancery in charge, there's always seems to be another drama. And I was really bullish. If you'd have asked me sort of back just after Wembley, I would have said that this would actually be a fairly positive season for Wednesday. I thought, the 96 points for a start is insane. You've then got the massive momentum builder of the Peterborough game, of then doing it in the 121st minute. And it did feel as though you were being really well set up to kick on a little bit coming back into the Championship. But then obviously he has to do what Chancery does, and it's disappointing to see somebody who can just disrupt the momentum of a club so much. But I do think there are bright spots. Obviously, I think this summer the recruitment does seem to have learned a little bit. It's less of these old experienced pros on big wages. You're looking a little bit more at sort of European markets, bringing in a younger sort of talent pool. I think a lot for me depends on how these sort of strikers fit, because I think goals is the one area of the squad that you probably look at as being fairly weak. What does it look like with Masaba and Gassama? Are they looking like players? Do you think their pace is going to make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, we've not seen a lot of either of them, to be honest.
Masaba can run, can't he? He's got really strong.
Masaba, you know what? Saturday, I was impressed with his defensive side of it, which I didn't expect at all. He was brilliant in the first half defensively. He had a few positive runs, but nothing came of them. To be honest, at the moment, it seems very, going to a back four, whereas Darren played a 3 or a 5 at the back, depending which way you look at it. You know what I mean? And yeah, flat back four, we're playing for Mayo, who's a centre half at left back, and it just seems a bit toothless going forward at the moment, to be completely honest with you. And then we saw Gassama for around half an hour, I think. So looked a bit lightweight, but he's 19. Do you know what I mean? It's going to take him. It's going to take him both time to get used to it. But I just think it just all seems a bit. Like the thing is, I think we've said between us and a couple of us on the pod that you have for me 10 games. Within the first 5 games, you want to see something, and then the next 5 games you want to see a little bit more. And by the 10th game, you want to have a style of play or looking like you've got some sort of identity. Whereas at the moment, it just seems, I don't know. For me, it just it is what it is, and we're in the position we are. And it's it's not you say it's not the manager's fault. He's agreed to come, but it's not his fault. He's here after what's happened, and I just think for me, it just seems so polar opposites. He's not, for me, he's not come across the best in the press. He's like I say, after 2 competitive games, he's calling players out. When really, has he had enough? Has he had enough time to see them and whatever else? And I just think for me, I think if we could have got someone who's been around English football a bit more, they'd have known what the club's gone through and what. Because the thing with Darren Moore is, we weren't in a very good place when he took over. Points deduction, transfer embargo. We'd not been paying players, as much as we pay good wages until the last January window is the first time we spent a fee on anyone in the whole time we've been here. He's built the fans back up. The club were like playing together, and it just seems like that's all been ripped up.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what worries me. I do want to bring in Ben Rowley from Stoke City and Connor Southwell of Norwich City in a moment. But I've got a final question for you, Liam, which is the worrying thing that I would have would be that in the last game, that one of the biggest highlights that was included in that sort of 2-minute highlight package was Barry Bannon having a shot from 30, 40 yards out. And as much as I think Barry Bannon's a great technician, it kind of worries me that you're so out of ideas as a sort of creative entity that Bannon's thinking, can I try and do a Marco Matthias?
Yeah, and it seems that after the Southampton game, which was pretty much a free hit, it was one of those, it could have gone, they might not have turned up, or what happened. And I think the scoreline flattered us a little bit, to be completely honest with you. They had 80% of the ball or whatever they had in. There was a big palaver made about actually Barry Bannon's role in that game and how it came out in the press that he was going to play higher up the pitch like Spanish teams and be in better positions when he receives the ball. But then the next game, Hull away, he was pretty much playing left back when he picked the ball up and was spraying it. And then
you can't press Liam. That's the thing. That's the reason that I don't think he can be effective high up the pitch, because if you want to be aggressive against the ball, Bannon just can't run. So
yeah, to be fair to him, I think he's all right at pressing. To be fair to him,
really.
No, he's sound.
Southampton, where he was standing off and
I think that's the whole. To be honest with you, I think that's the whole plan so far. There seems to be no press, and that's the worrying thing. There's no press up to the final third. We're defending quite narrow by the looks of it, but it's kind of like you have the ball and do what you want, and then when we have got the ball, there's not a lot going forward. And at the moment, Bannon seems to be playing here, there, and everywhere. So after this big statement coming out that he's going to be playing a certain way, it's not stuck to that. So and like Gregory had a chance early on. He had another one which wasn't shown on the highlights that he blazed over the bar. And I think in a lot of fans' opinions, Gregory is probably a more rounded striker than Smith, but he's on the pitch to finish those chances and he didn't. So it seems that we're going to, at the moment at least, until maybe things settle, and I don't know if he's trying to keep it, or he's been trying to keep it tight for the first few games, then bring his players in and hopefully change that. But so far, the worry is really going forward. And like I say, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But it is a big worry.
Tough times, I think, for Wednesday. But listen, Liam, thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Love the stuff you do on Wednesday Till I Die podcast. So thanks for joining us, and good luck to the Owls this season.
Perfect. Cheers. Thanks for having us. Ollie's not too convinced on that.
I'm not giving you good luck, but thank you for coming on all the same.
Cheers, lads. Thank you.
At least you're honest. Yeah, cheers, Lim. I'd like to introduce two fans of clubs that are having a really good start to this season that will be really happy after disappointing 22-23 campaigns. That is Ben Rowley of Stoke City and Norwich City fan and journalist Connor Southwell from PinkUn. Good evening, gents. How are we?
Yeah, not too bad considering. Yeah,
evening all. Not too bad.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. We'll start with you, Connor, because I want to talk about 7 points from the first 3 games, this revitalised Norwich City side. I did watch quite a lot of your match verdicts last couple of seasons, really, and you did feel like you're repeating yourself a little bit through no fault of your own, just because there are lots of things that were kind of pretty monotonous, I suppose. But this season, it feels like a different story so far.
Yeah, I feel like last season, if anyone would have watched those videos weekly, it's a good example of just someone slowly having a breakdown every week. Kind of what it felt like, culminating with probably the last few of the season. But yeah, it's been really good. I think you'll see a smile on my face if you come to Norfolk and take a walk around Carrow Road. You'll see a smile on people's faces again, and it's been really nice and really refreshing and really unexpected as well. And it's really hard to quantify, I think, sometimes, but sometimes you can just have a feeling, and there can be a better feeling around everything. And that's kind of where we are with Norwich at the moment. It feels a lot better. They look a lot better on the pitch. They're much more adaptable. They look a lot better coached. The signings that they've made, which a lot of people have questioned internally and externally, I mean, within Norwich's fan base and outside of Norwich's fan base, have all made a real impact so far. So yeah, it's been really good. I think there's probably, I'd describe it as a cautious optimism, but considering how it was last season, where everything was so toxic and the fans turned against the hierarchy, it was 1 win in 11. Carrow Road, they didn't score a goal at Carrow Road from February basically until the end of the season. So I think if you ask most Norwich fans at the start of the campaign, they will have said, we just want to feel something. And I think at the moment, they probably find themselves falling rather than feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Connor, I want to talk about 2 midfielders, one of whom was a known quantity coming into this season and another bit more of an unknown quantity, one of which would be Gabriel Sara, who I think we all felt that if Norwich were going to have a chance of challenging this season, they'd need to have him bringing the Samba flair to the absolute max, and he's done that so far. But then there's Jonny Rowe, who I think we'd have kind of thought of as this sort of exuberant, energetic, direct runner that can maybe frighten people with, running at opponents. But actually, he's brought a bit more quality to his game, and that seems to have really lifted Norwich with those 2 players clicking simultaneously.
No, Gabriel Sara's rubbish. Ignore him. Leave him alone until the window closes. No, he's excellent, and he is excellent. What I would caveat this on a serious point is, I know there's obviously a lot of very impressive chance creation numbers around, but he is taking corners, so I think it is inflating it a little bit. No one else has taken a corner yet, so I would caveat that.
You're being a Simon Cowell figure there, Connor.
Yeah, well, I'm being particularly picky, but the biggest compliment I can pay to him is that in every game that Norwich have played so far this season, he's been the best player on the pitch, and it's probably not even been that close. And that's Norwich players and opponent players. So he is, and he's not even fully fit at the moment either. He missed a lot of pre-season because he had his appendix removed, and basically only came back for, I think, the last 2 pre-season friendlies maybe. So he is, we're kind of seeing him fade in games a little bit at the minute, but I think that's a fitness point rather than a quality point. But no, just a tremendous footballer, real sort of box to box player, capable of creating, capable of scoring, but also actually really good in terms of the press and how Norwich want to counter press and backwards press, as David Wagner calls it, which I really like.
Yeah, I was slightly curious about that description.
Yeah, which is good. But he's just an all round midfielder, and I think the way he's grown from how he first joined the club last summer, when it was all a little bit raw, he couldn't speak a word of English, everyone was going, oh, is this guy going to adapt, and is he going to adapt quick enough to where he is now, is incredible. And I think, he, in terms of importance, if you want to compare it to someone, I'd say we're probably in levels of importance as we were with Emi Buendia a few years ago. I think he really could become that significant for Norwich, and the way that David Wagner wants to play. Purely on those metrics, not the talent and not obviously where he is, but I think in terms of the way that David Wagner wants to play, you have to have Gabby Sauer in it for it to function in the way it's functioning at the moment. And then John Rowe, I think I'm so pleased for him because he's had a really difficult period the last year or so. It feels to me like he's been around for a little while. He kind of came into it towards the end of the Premier League campaign, but Dean Smith was reluctant to start him for various reasons, and I disagree with Dean Smith and a lot of what he did at Norwich City, but I think at that point there was a solid argument as to why that was the case. He then suffered a really bad injury. I think it was in pre-season, and as he was coming back from that injury, Norwich went on a sort of mid-season break when the World Cup was to Tampa, and they played on not a very good pitch, to be kind. And he then did another injury, which kept him out basically for the remainder of the season, bar a little bit towards the end. But before this season, the most he'd played in a professional game for Norwich City was on the final day of last season against Blackpool. I think he played about half an hour, and that was the most minutes he'd had. He hadn't started a game. So for him to be thrust in the way that he has is excellent. He's nice stat for you. He's the first Norwich City player since the World War to score in the first 4 games of the season.
Wow.
And he's just been a real, I said about feeling earlier, he's been a real bundle of energy and positivity and brought excitement. He's a real personality as well. I'm sure you guys maybe have seen the interview that he did after the Hull game, possibly when he scored his first one, and very bubbly. That's the way he is. So I'm really delighted for him. He's obviously got a long way to go in terms of consistency and proving that he can do it. But I think he's a name that I've had mentioned to me for about 4 or 5 years as someone who could be potentially really exciting. So it's nice to see him do that. But it just feels to me like he's been a bit of a spring, just waiting to be unleashed. And I think we're seeing him be unleashed now. And you're right, it's not just the goals, it's what he's brought to Norwich City's all-round game. And for a 20-year-old, it's incredibly exciting to have him in Norwich City's attack at the moment.
Yeah, gone up another gear, that's for sure. Oli, let's talk about the South American market, because Norwich have utilised that particularly well. Gabriel Sauer, of course, is the one at the moment that Connor was talking about there. They've also got Marcelino Nunes. They've signed a lad called Pedro Lima today. So it does seem like, because of Brexit and everything and the limitations in the European market, they've had to sort of cast their net a little bit wider. And it seems to have paid off for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, hopefully so. It's one of those where it's an untapped potential, isn't it? And I think, like you've said there, with Brexit at the moment, people are looking at these alternatives to try and find, okay, well, where can we go next? And if I've learned anything from Football Manager, South America is just, that's where the gold is. And so I think it's really exciting time. I think, obviously, one of the things to not get too carried away with, and Connor really referenced it there, is that adaptation period. It does feel as though these players aren't going to be able to hit the ground running. I don't think you're tapping that market and expecting an immediate return through the first sort of 3 to 6 months at the club. I think they're going to need time to settle in and to develop and just to get used to the changes. Learning the language is massive for players coming in. But I do think you will start to reap the rewards, as you're seeing now with Sarri. You know, Connor might be telling us that he's just a set-piece merchant, but I think there's a lot more to the game than that. And so, yeah, I think...
Can I say that's not what I said?
Fishing there, Oli. What a signing he's been for the club, and looks like he's got even better this season. So if he can find full fitness, goodness knows what he could do. Ben, talk to me about Stoke City, because I think I'm maybe a little bit surprised at how quickly things have amalgamated for Stoke, because you did a lot of your business. Some great signings, by the way, but a lot of the business in the last couple of weeks before going into the start of the season. And yet there's been players like Andre Vidijal, for example, who've just been able to, plug and play kind of thing, go hit the ground running.
Yeah, don't say I didn't warn you. Stoke had a big opportunity this summer, right? You know, we let a lot of players off the books who are older, earning a lot of money. The financial fair play restrictions eased on us because of that. And those stupid transfer fees that we paid 4 or 5 years ago have finally gone away. Plus, with the opening up of the wildcard system, bringing in people like Jared Dublin has had a recruitment, and Stoke seem to have quietly had one of the, certainly the busiest, but possibly one of the better transfer windows as well. They filled all the positions they need to. They've replaced everybody that they've let go, including Jacob Brown to Luton. They replaced him with Mehdi Leris, and a couple of other players to boot with that money too. It's a Stoke that's pretty unrecognisable. I think we've kept around 8 players. We've signed 12. We're going to sign more, no doubt. There's going to be 3 or 4 more before the window closes. And it's a good blend of experience that he brought in at the start of the window. People like Daniel Johnson, people like Ben Pearson who know the league. Ender Stevens to boot as well. Then he started to bring in the players who are for today. So people like Andre Vidigal, who scored, is it 4 goals in his 4 games? I think it might be. And then people like Wesley, who he really needed an option up front to hoof a ball to, really. Brian May's an exciting signing. Chiquinho the same. Luke McNally on a loan is great too. But now we're starting to sign players for, the future. And that's really exciting too. So Nikola Jojic, I think he's called, has come in. A Serbian wonder kid by all accounts. Looks like we're bringing in Bae Junho, I think, from the South Korean league. He again seems to be a South Korean wonder kid. And there'll be a couple more of that ilk, I imagine, as well.
Do you know what, Ben? I love the fact that you're the kind of club that can sign these exotic players from the European market, and then you're also signing Daniel Johnson, who Alex Neil knows from his time at Preston. It seems like a very contradictory recruitment strategy. But I mean, I mentioned Daniel Johnson there. He's actually started really well. I mean, in that 4-1 win over Rotherham, he was man of the match, wasn't he?
Yeah, and this is. It seems to be part of the plan, right? As I said, he's done his recruitment in stages. He seems to have done this to build a culture at Stoke, along with Ricky Martin, who's came in as a basically technical director. He signed these experienced players, knowing that we need them, knowing that people like Ender Stevens may not start every week, but if he does, he'd be a great asset to the club. But it's there to build character along with the people that have already been at the club. You're then bringing in the exciting players from these foreign leagues that we mentioned. I think we brought in players from the Hungarian league, from the Portuguese league, from the Italian league. God knows which league we'll go for next. And then, people like Mehdi Leris, he seems to have brought him in not only for his similar play style to Jacob Brown, but also because he highlighted quite clearly that, he speaks a number of different languages, and that will help embed some of these younger players that come in into the club. So they really thought about it this time. And my only concern is that with such a high turnover, was it Tifo Football I was watching this on? About 50% of transfers, for whatever reason, don't work.
Yeah.
If we sign 16 players, 8 of them are going to be duds. Now, maybe with a bit smarter recruitment, that won't be the case. We'll have a few more. But, we've certainly, I think Brighton did this a few years ago. They signed loads of players in the hope that some of them will come good. 3 or 4 years later, look what's happening. So we may be a few years behind the curve, but we are finally trying it.
Interesting. And I mean, Oli, coming to you from the outside, do you think Stoke can sort of maybe alter their expectations a little bit in light of how well they've played and how good they've looked from the first 3 games?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously the start of the season, and I say this every year, I never quite know what to make of Stoke. They're always the one team in the Championship that every time I never know what to expect. I don't know if I'm saying that they should be getting promoted or if I'm saying they need to be keeping an eye out behind them. But it's been a really positive start. And I think that it means that in the league this season, we've seen some of the bigger teams make slow starts. We're seeing teams who've got 100% records, but they've not actually looked that good. And so if you're a team who is getting in consistently good performances and you feel as though there's something to really build from there, gives you the platform for a really good season in the Championship this year. And I do think it means that teams can be looking towards the playoffs and thinking, I think that's there and that's achievable for us this year.
What do you think, Ben? Do you think Stoke can make a push for the playoffs? Because I was almost quite sneery about it when we discussed like a few, probably it was like early July, wasn't it, when we actually did the podcast when you had hardly anyone there. It's one of those Will Smith or those memes where someone walks into an empty house and doesn't know where. But it's interesting, because I thought this was going to be very much a transitional season for Stoke. Have you kind of gone back on? Should we go back on that? Should we rethink what's possible?
I think it was always going to be a season of transition to a degree. As I said, high turnover players, some aren't going to work out, and Alex Neil is still learning a lot about them. We were losing it against Ipswich, and he changed it after half an hour. He's not afraid to make the change, but he knows that the players he's bringing in, he's not had on his radar. It's great to be able to bring in players like Ender Stevenson, Daniel Johnson, who he knows and trusts, Ben Pearson the same. But, Stoke are cutting corners where they can. We were going to bring in Matthias Arkic. We saw an opportunity with Mark Travers and we've taken him instead. And we're doing that across the board. Looks like we've been interested in Jaden Philogene.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like we're not going for him because of the transfer fee, and we're able to find, hopefully, someone just as good somewhere else for us. Lesser price tag.
Unseen corners, yeah.
Exactly.
Hopefully
because of that, I don't know. I don't know where we're going to be. I don't think even Alex Neil knows where we should be, really. It depends how the signings come good. A top half finish would be great. I think we've got a better squad composition than last season.
More depth, definitely.
Oh, depth, and we were just looking weak so I don't think we had a right back until like October or something. Something daft like that. So we can go in with a bit more confidence, a bit more belief rather than just hope. But we are hoping on how many of the players are actually going to be effective for us.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see on that. Connor, just coming to you finally. Has the mood at Norwich has obviously been lifted, as we alluded to. Has that changed your feelings on what's possible this season? Because there was a lot of pessimism, even, going into the campaign.
Yeah, I would say I've probably been one of the more optimistic ones, and I probably wasn't expecting them to get in the top six. So I get that, because the feeling around the place was so bad towards the end of last season that if we'd have been sat here with 2 points out of 9, I think the conversation would be very different and the feeling would be very different. But actually, my feeling around them kind of shifted in pre-season, and they began looking a lot better. They brought in a coach who was previously at Huddersfield, Narcis Palash, who's very highly rated, and you speak to any of the players and they'll tell you about the impact that he has had on some of the tactical work that they've been doing. They look far more adaptable. I think the issue, it's not necessarily an issue, but the one maybe concern I can see down the road, 46-game championship season, is at the moment they are very, very well suited with the starting 11 that they have to play David Wagner's style. If they get injuries, and we've seen this in games actually as they've kind of progressed and they've had to make substitutions, actually the quality of their performances have significantly dipped. Against Hull, it dipped in after the sort of first 70 minutes. I know they obviously won that game late on for Adam Eder, but the same at Southampton. They dropped far too deep, far too quickly, and that nearly cost them 1 point, let alone 3. And then at the weekend as well, I thought and look, they were 3-0 up, so that's partly a case for that. But the performance levels did drop as well when Wagner started to make changes. So I think that's one to watch, and whether they have the momentum and capability to play at the intensity that they are. And I mean that probably more from a mental standpoint than a physical one, I think is a point as well. And I'm also really intrigued to see how they do when teams maybe figure out how to play them, because I think what we've seen at the moment is them be pretty adaptable to different challenges. And if teams sit in, then they'll go, okay, fine, we'll use the wide areas, we'll put crosses into Ashley Barnes and Josh Sargent. We've got quality from range if need be. They know that they've got quality in wide areas now with John Rowe that's capable of breaking down teams. They can score from set pieces. If team comes and presses them, then they'll be quite happy to play in transition. Russell Martin described them as one of the strongest in the league at that. So we've kind of got this nice situation where you've gone from Dean Smith, who was very reactive, Daniel Farker, who was an idealist really, and very set in his ways and would kind of refuse to budge come what may. I think you've probably got this nice medium with David Wagner where he's quite happy to be adaptable, but there are core principles there that he wants to do as well. So it's been really interesting to see how this has all played out, and it's 3 games and we don't know how it's going to transpire. But I certainly feel that if they can maintain the level of performance that they can, it's a big if, that, you know, they're definitely going to be better than the team last season. And if they can maintain what they've done in the first 3 games, they're going to be a top 6 side. So yeah, but I say all of those things very, very cautiously, because we know what the Championship is like. They won 8 games last season at one point, and the wheels fell off. But this does feel a bit more sustainable. The performances have been better. So I think it's really interesting. But I think it's nice that Norwich are where they are, and I think everyone of a Norwich persuasion is just enjoying the reality of where they are without probably thinking too much about the bigger picture and where this season could go.
Well, that's always a nice place to be in. Listen, Connor, thanks so much for your time. I love the stuff that you do with PinkUn, so really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Likewise, Ben, thanks for joining us and giving us the lowdown on Stoke. Thanks always to my co-host Oli from the Sheffield United Way. And this has been EFL Debate, the Championship podcast, and we'll see you again next week.